However you are and whenever you are, welcome and join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal landmines and alien crossroads. This is Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith, and I'm grateful to be here on the Inception Radio Network with you. My guests coming up are Cory Atoms, author in the making, Ken Cherry, author of Marc Slade Investigates the Stephenville UFO, and Stanton Friedman, the physicist, author, and researcher who blew wide open the UFO crash case at Roswell, New Mexico, many years ago. Okay, and if you're tuning into the Inception Radio Network for the first time, you can always also download the IRN app for your smartphone by just going to the App Store, downloading it, and it's great because you can chat and listen live at the same time and get involved with the Inception Radio Network community. If you have any questions for me, any criticisms, any feedback, just give it to me straight. I'm cool with that. You can go to Paranormal Now Radio on Facebook and just leave a message, comment, whatever. And you can also email me directly at paranormalnow@aol.com. I'd love to hear from you guys. And now for a new segment I'm calling Paranormal Words of Wisdom. This is Jay Yates from copscrew.com, Paranormal Investigators.
Hello, my name is Jay Yates, and my paranormal word of wisdom is, ghosts are people too.
And that's your Paranormal Words of Wisdom. Thank you, Jay Yates. Actually, Jay will be on the show next week, March the 11th at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 8 p.m. Pacific Time, to discuss ghost hauntings and poltergeists. This is the life he lives. So, why am I doing paranormal radio? I was a little hesitant, to be honest with you, going down this road, because there's a lot of criticism in this field of research and the many odd topics, including hauntings and spirituality and metaphysics and life after death. It goes back, well, partially to Epic Voyages Radio, because that's what allowed me to get comfortable with this format and fall in love with it. And so I'm extremely grateful that that was an opportunity given to me. But ultimately, it goes back to when I was 12 years old. I was in the backseat of a car with a friend, and we're going down the New Jersey Parkway. And we look up out the window up into the sky, and the sky is perfectly clear. There's stars out. And then we see there are two bright, very bright stars in the fore. And it's sort of moving slightly against the background of the stars. And then suddenly one of these objects takes off, just streaks across the sky, and comes to a stop on a dime. And then a little bit later, it does it again. It streaks and back from whence it came, stops on a dime instantly. And then it takes off one more time, straight up into the upper atmosphere, like a meteorite going in reverse. Now, I've thought about this over the years, and I have been open to any explanation as to what it was. What I do know, it wasn't an aircraft of any man-made design that we know of. It wasn't a flock of geese or ducks, and definitely wasn't swamp gas. And it was not a weather balloon. I've heard other explanations like, well, it could have been an insect or a fly, and there's lights reflecting off of it. And I thought about that, I really have, and I looked to see what would explain it, and it's not that. So what is it? It's a mystery. And as a child, it made me question what I was being told was reality, and what was possible and not possible. And this completely opened my door to perception, and how our perception can be affected by the truths we're told versus the experiences that we have. And from there, that opened up further into questioning spirituality, life after death, metaphysics, even things like Bigfoot. Yep. Why not? People see things and they have experiences. Yes, they can be misidentified, but why not accept that maybe some of these eyewitness accounts are true or bear some truth that warrants investigation? And I've been hypnotized. No, hypnotized is the wrong word. That borderlines with being obstinate. Not hypnotized, but I've been fascinated and, somewhat obsessed with all things paranormal and unknown. And I'm a big believer in science, but I also believe that it's okay to stretch your imagination a little further beyond that. Because sometimes it's that stretching and that reaching that leads us to new conclusions that can ultimately change our reality and the way we think of the world that we live in. So, speaking of metaphysics, which is where I'm leading with this, my next guest is Cory Atoms. Cory Atoms is associated with alienaxioms.com. He runs their social media accounts, and he's in the process of writing a book. I've had him on the show when I was with Epic Voyages Radio, and I wanted to get an update with Cory to see how he's doing and see what his research and work is leading into. Cory, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, brother. So what are you up to?
Well, right now, currently, I am just kind of in the process of writing the book I'm working on. I've got a rough draft going on. I've got the chapters forming, and each chapter is sort of the different organizational thing I'm working on. So, for instance, like the first chapter is called "You Are Not Unique," and it's just an idea of trying to break down the ego of a person and let everybody understand the group consciousness that we all have kind of together. So the statement, "You are not unique," is sort of a bold statement. And it's meant to sort of draw your attention to that statement because everybody feels that they are individual. And
so what is unique?
Well, I think unique is really just a human construct because it's something that we all feel that we want to kind of bring out something that's inside of ourselves, but we all are doing it in a way that is fighting against something. Well, it's sort of like fighting against the system, I guess you could call it, where like we want to do something, carve our own niche in the world, create our own reality. And I think that's a really powerful idea, is to create your own reality. But, you often hear this and you think, like, whenever I was younger, I used to think, create your own reality. Well, that's not true, because if I wanted to create my own reality, then I could walk through walls if I wanted, because I'm creating that reality, right? Well, that doesn't happen because it's a wall. Well, what makes that wall any different than, like, the car that you sit in or the air that we breathe? What is it that makes it a wall? Why is it there? And so I was thinking to myself that, well, if we create our own reality, then if we truly are connected to each other, if we aren't, quote unquote, not unique, then we would all be connected with our group consciousness. So, like, the idea would be, say, if I wanted to walk through the wall, well, I can't walk through the wall because every human in society or every human that's ever lived in existence can all agree that a wall is a wall. But if you were to take like a very powerful microscope and examine it on an atomic level, there's a space between the atoms of that wall. There's a space between the atoms of the oxygen that we're walking through. So why are the atoms of the oxygen allowing us to walk through them, but the wall isn't? Is it because we've created this wall in our minds? Like, we've built the wall, so the wall is there. We've all created that reality. You create your own reality. So we've all agreed this wall is a wall, so you can't walk through it. We've all agreed that you can't walk on water, or we've all agreed that you can't do this. And so in something that happens that's beyond this, I guess, group decided reality, it's kind of like, then it makes it a miracle. Well, when you have these different levels of labels like this, where, things that happen that can be miraculous, that puts it above the normal, that makes it kind of be unique. Well, that gives somebody else, or all of us, something to look to, or to think of, or to aspire to. Well, so my big spiel is that we aren't unique. That person that is doing these miraculous things, or this deity, or, whatever it is that you want to believe in, or not believe in, they aren't unique from you. The only difference is that you're telling yourself you can't do it. And so if I can I guess the whole purpose of this book is to sort of lift the veil off of everything, to make you realize that it's sort of like to break apart your ego, but then also to enliven yourself. Calling it Conversations with Myself, as I think I've told you before.
And you gotta stick with that.
That's kind of where it's at. Yeah, oh, totally. It's like I feel like it's something I've already read before, and it's just kind of coming out of me, and I'm trying to remember it, and that's what's taking me the process of it. But I think
Does,
of,
when you're writing, do you sort of jump from chapter to chapter, or are you going strictly
oh
linear?
yeah, oh no, it's like I wrote down 6 chapters I wanted to do because I thought like carbon, the atomic number for carbon is 6. I thought that's pretty neat. So I wrote down just 6 ideas, like you are not unique. Another one is thank you and cloud gazing. Another one's called what if it worked, and then just these things like this. And so the idea, I wrote all those down, and then I was like, well, how do I want to structure these? And I just kind of wrote like 1, 2, 3 in different orders of how which chapter would go first and second. And as I write something, I'll think of like the biggest thing I'm working on with this is it's not the name I have for it. I'm calling it wave theory, and which isn't in stone yet, but it's wave theory, and it's the idea of thinking of the universe as a giant pool or water, because that's the easiest metaphor I can come up with, where the splash and the ripple of one thing affects the water around it and causes different currents and stuff like this. So like a supernova in a distant galaxy will explode and cause a ripple in the water of the universe. And that rippling wave effect will run into different planets and they'll bounce off of them or hit a black hole or run into an asteroid or, whatever. And all of these kind of chain effects, these little butterfly effects, all affect each other on a grand scale. And I guess that's where it's kind of like fractals with sacred geometry. As you look down into it, it's infinitely the same exact thing, but they're all the larger picture. If you were to just zoom out, it's still the same thing. So wave theory
Well,
is what I'm working on. Yeah.
yeah. Well, how much of that relies on data and evidence, proof, or doesn't it? Are you saying that it's the human mind, if we collectively alter the way we see and speak, that
Mm.
reality itself would change, or do you have other data to suggest that, scientific data to suggest that this could be possible?
Well, see, I'm going with a lot of it is things I came from my own mind that I've kind of put together from different little sources. And so as I write the book, one of the challenges is that I'm working with, I have a goal. My goal is that I want to be able to hand the book to my grandma and have my grandma be able to understand it. Now, my grandma's a very judgmental type of person and very like, citations and resources and all that. So I have yet to do, that's what I'm spending most of my summer doing, is getting the hard scientific facts for the base level things to kind of give me a groundwork of like facts and then to build up from there. Because like the ultimate goal is like making people understand that if we were to kind of agree that you could walk through a wall, you could. But we as a species can't actually do that because the theory is that there are beings of higher intellect above us who also can create their own reality. And if they have a stronger force than we do and a better understanding of the way that everything works, their creations they would have would be a stronger creation than we could do because they understand the mechanics of it. So if they were the ones who created the reality of Earth and they said the wall was unwalkable or impassable, every human could get together all they wanted and we could all believe. But if we still can't get beyond this higher wavelength or higher thought form, the wall stays still. So I guess the idea of the book is to try to like make people elevate their minds, maybe.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like what you're trying to do. I hope so.
Yeah, it's kind of like an expose on the suppression that's happening to everybody, really.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean it's, you have to admit that it's kind of hard to believe in anything metaphysically based. It kind of has that sort of new age fringe feeling to it. But actually, which leads me to something kind of not really associated with what you're doing at all. But
Hmm.
but you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world of speculation, and I have to ask you because I have a hang up with this. I have someone that I respect very much, I like very much in my life, and we disagree on one big thing. And this person believes in the flat Earth theory, and
Yeah.
I really, really struggle with understanding why people still hang on to this belief. What do you think it
Hmm.
is that? What are people seeing, reading? What are they eating? I don't get it.
It's something in the water. Yeah, right. Well, I don't understand the flat Earth theory because even when you blow a bubble, it takes a sphere shape. Like a sphere is like what's naturally formed, and it seems like if the universe were a pool, as I like to think of it, the water, quote unquote water, would make spheres of like the shapes that are out there. So stars would be spherical, and it seems like planets and gases would collect and become spherical. Even like the way like a torus works, you have like the top and the bottom kind of spinning. It seems as though anything caught in the middle of that energy, which like a magnetic field would create its own sort of torus. Seems like that magnetic field would work with gravity and build in the gases or the material needed for planets and stars and would create a sphere. I don't see how a flat surface works. Even though the only time I've ever looked into flat Earth theory, the one thing I ever saw as an argument for it was the way that stars fall. And apparently, if the way this person said, if a planet was spherical, you would see stars coming from all directions in the sky, not just top to bottom, where you'd see them coming up from the horizon in different directions, I guess. But I don't know. I just think that the flat Earth theory, there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation out there in the internet, and because that's what we use to look up things. And it's like if you go down the rabbit hole. So why I don't like this term going down the rabbit hole. Sometimes you go down the rabbit hole to find bait or food that's not even there, and it's not always good to dive
Right.
down into the rabbit hole.
Well, I guess that's like the saying "I want to believe" from the X-Files, which we all love to toss around. But in a sense, it's like, yeah, but if you want to believe too much, then you may be looking for something that's not there, and yeah, providing support and proof to support that theory that's really not proof at all. Might actually be, if I may say, alternative facts.
Yeah, yeah, but truly though, it's like people, they just are chomping at the bit, and when they get any information that's kind of counterculture, they adapt it immediately to their belief system. Where it's like
Well, that
you've been
makes
told
sense.
your
Yeah.
whole life, you've been told your whole life that it's not even that they have any evidence. It's they're more rebelling against society by believing this flat Earth or something,
Right. All right, cool.
which
Corey,
is
thank you
silly.
so much for coming on the show, man. I'm really happy that you're back. I'm glad that you're writing your book. We'll have you on occasion. Just keep us updated with your progress. And obviously, when the book is ready to print, man, let us know.
Oh yes, I'm thinking this winter I'll have my first rough draft ready.
Okay, nice. And how can people get in touch with you, Corey?
Well, just I have an email. It's Cory Atoms. Atoms is in the molecule. CoryAtoms @gmail.
Okay, very cool. All right,
Yeah.
Corey, thank you. And my next guest is Ken Cherry, Epic founder and president. Ken Cherry is a former Texas State MUFON director, author, and investigator. He has founded the Epic Voyages investigation team and Epic Voyages Radio. Throughout his years of experience, he is most fascinated with the 2008 Stephenville UFO event and sightings. He is the author of the fictional novel Marc Slade Investigates the Stephenville UFO, which serves to leak truths of Ken's very own experience while experiencing the Stephenville UFO event. And he is also a friend of mine. Ken, welcome to the show.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be among your first guests here.
Yeah, well, I could not have you as my first guest because were it not for you, I wouldn't even have the show.
No.
So I wanted to thank you for the opportunities that you had given me on Epic Voyages Radio, which I'm sure a lot of the Inception Radio Network people are familiar with.
Well deserved, Alan.
So Ken, Epic's gone through a little bit of a change recently. Is there anything that you want to talk about as far as the structure, or is the show going to keep going on as it is?
Well, as you know, Epic is an all-volunteer organization, and we are proud to have many folks from the paranormal world, ufology, cryptozoology, and so forth. And people come, they give their time, and most generously in many cases, and as their plate becomes full, then they move on. And we've been very, very fortunate to find other folks who are equally well qualified in other aspects that we bring on, and we think that it helps to keep our show fresh and brings new perspectives and new ideas to the program. So we're into our 6th year and still going strong. So I expect under the current leadership of Dr. Joseph Burks that we will continue for years to come.
Yeah, I hope so, and I'm sure the audience obviously responds positively to the program. My personal experience being on the show was, nothing but gratifying as far as hosting. I mean, that was, I didn't even realize that I would want to do this more often. But you actually opened that door and just gave me that opportunity. I mean, you've done a lot of researching on your own, and through MUFON. But when you do that, how much do you use your gut, and how much do you rely on data and sort of combine those two to make an assessment?
Well, gut is something, I guess, when you boil it down, is based upon real life experience applied to any given situation. I guess you could call it gut. I wouldn't call it instinct. I would call it something that's built upon, a firm base of experience. So that and proof, of course. I had a very early experience in my life, and I was about 7 years old, of a very dramatic UFO sighting. And while that would tend to make most people think that, I'm a believer and I'm going to think anything I hear is true, actually it's had sort of the opposite effect. Since I know what I saw myself and I believe in the reality of it, I'm looking for evidence of this in all the cases that I'm looking into. I'm probably more of a critic and tend to drill down more on what the person is saying and what evidence is available than perhaps a lot of investigators who haven't had any sort of experience.
I never asked you before. Have you ever investigated someone who's actually had an abduction experience?
Yes, many times.
And then what is that like to talk to someone for the first time? And I'm guessing often they're opening up to you more than maybe someone else.
Well, in almost every case that I can recall, it was a very emotional retelling of their experience. They all seem to have this memory burned into their, something that they just could not escape. And some of them, it had really tragic effect on their lives. In a number of cases, it led to loss of jobs and very often breakups with the spouse. Because they just became so obsessed with it that it was something that they just could not shake.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because I feel like when you see movies made or documentaries, the focus sort of always seems to be on the experience and what happened, rather than what happened after the experience, because the assumption often is these people are just telling a tall tale for attention or just to spice life up a little bit. And in fact, our lives are affected detrimentally in a lot of negative ways afterwards. So that sort of tells one that, hey, this person is not doing this for their own benefit. They're telling something they believe.
Absolutely. And although many of the stories that I heard tend to be of a benign nature, it still affected them dramatically. I guess it's just the human psyche just trying to deal with this, something that's just so out of their reality that it's difficult to cope. It's not that they were in any way harmed or threatened physically, but the mental trauma is is very real for them.
And does that affect you, or do you sort of just take
Well,
it with ease?
I mean, you can't help but be, somewhat sympathetic and, kind of feel for the individual. But I would think that the regularity of the same type of reaction from these abductees, contactees, is something that, if someone were to just stand there and offhandedly tell me, oh, I was abducted last night, that would be, and, they took me and they did this and that, they're rather unemotional about it. I would have my doubts because it would be so far outside of my experience in dealing with contactees, abductees, that, it would make me look further. And then in one case I looked and the person said, oh, no, I never watched science fiction or whatever, and looked in their bookshelf and, it was full of science fiction books and had, Whitley Strieber's famous book, Contact, with the big almond-eyed alien on the front cover. So.
Communion, yeah.
Yeah, Communion. So that, it does affect.
Well, I guess they would be just afraid to admit, because they didn't want you to judge them. Right? Could that be a possibility? Yeah.
True.
It seems to happen to people who are interested in it and people who are not interested in it. It seems to go both ways.
Exactly. I don't think Betty and Barney Hill were much into, that's that type of genre when they were abducted. Right. So obviously, that is one of the more famous cases of abduction. And we did speak with Betty Hill. As a matter of fact, had an interview with her just prior to her passing. And her story was just as sharp and crisp and firm as ever. And, we did see the dress with the residue on it that had been analyzed. And I mean, it was just like it was yesterday for her. So, and of course, some of the things that she was able to reveal under hypnosis that have been confirmed since then, all tend to support, her and Barney's story.
Yeah. So what's next for Ken Cherry?
Well, as you know, we've experimented with a number of things in, the TV world, and we're still hoping to come up with a paranormal program. We do have a pretty well-known producer who's very long resume in producing UFO and paranormal type programming, who is working with us, and hopefully we'll come up with something in the near future that we'll be able to offer. Don't think we're going to be able to call it epic. The studios all seem to want something that's a little more, grabby, and so but anyway, those are just things that are sort of in the wings that we're working on.
Ken, thank you so much for opening the door to me to have a relationship and work with Epic. It's been an absolute pleasure of mine.
Well, thank you, and it has been a pleasure to work with you as well, Alan.
All right, cool. All right, so Ken Cherry, author of Marc Slade Investigates, the Stephenville UFO. You can get more information about his book at the epicvoyagers.com website. And, of course, Epic Voyagers Radio plays every Monday, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and is rebroadcast Fridays on the Dark Matter Digital Network. All right, Ken, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. After this quick break, my next guest is Stanton Friedman, physicist and the man who broke wide open the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash case and basically paved the way for ufologists for decades to come. We'll be right back.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
Welcome back to Paranormal Now Radio. My next guest is Stanton Friedman, the man who broke wide open the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash case and decades more of investigations. If you want to listen to IRN, just go to the website, inceptionradionetwork.com, and you can listen right there, or you can download the app to your smartphone and just search for IRN, download it, and you're good to go. And if you want to follow me, you can follow me on Paranormal Now on Instagram or Paranormal Now Radio on Facebook, or you can follow me on Twitter at paranormal_now. So now I'm going to read Stanton Friedman's bio. I usually wouldn't read a bio this long, but I feel that the information here is important for you all to get a good idea of his background and his credentials. Nuclear physicist lecturer Stanton T. Friedman received his BSc and MSc degrees in physics from the University of Chicago in 1955 and 1956. He was employed for 14 years as a nuclear physicist, but by such companies as GE, GM, Westinghouse, TRW Systems, Aerojet, General Nucleonics, and McDonnell Douglas, working in such highly advanced classified, eventually canceled programs as nuclear aircraft, fission and fusion rockets, and various compact nuclear power plants for space and terrestrial applications. And that's not all, there's a lot more. He became interested in UFOs in 1958, and since 1967 has lectured about them at more than 600 colleges and 100 professional groups in 50 U.S. states, 10 Canadian provinces, and 18 other countries, in addition to various nuclear consulting efforts. He has published more than 90 UFO papers and has appeared on hundreds of radio and TV programs, including on Larry King in 2007 and twice in 2008, and many other documentaries. He is the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and co-authored Crash at Corona, the definitive study of the Roswell incident. Top Secret Magic, his controversial book about the Majestic 12 group, established in 1947 to deal with alien technology, was published in 1996 and went through 6 printings. An expanded new edition was published in 2005. Stan was presented with a Lifetime UFO Achievement Award in Leeds, England in 2002 by UFO Magazine of the UK. He is co-author with Kathleen Marden, Betty Hill's niece, of a book in 2007 captured the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. The city of Fredericton, New Brunswick, declared August 1927-2007 Stanton Friedman Day. Flying Saucers and Science was published in June 2008 and is in its 3rd printing. His newest book, also co-authored with Kathleen Marden, is Science Was Wrong, released in June 2010. He has provided written testimony to congressional hearings, appeared twice at the UN, and been a pioneer in many aspects of ufology, including Roswell, Magic 12, the Betty Hill Marjorie Fish Star Map work, analysis of the Delphos, Kansas physical trace case, crashed saucers, flying saucer technology, and challenges to the SETI silly effort to investigate, in parentheses, cultists. He has spoken at more MUFON symposia than anyone. Stanton Friedman is a dual citizen of the USA and the United States. Now, that was the longest bio I've probably read on the air before, but I really felt that it's necessary to really get a grip on the lifelong work that Stanton has done. So Stanton, welcome very much to Paranormal Now.
I'm glad to be here. I have to add our latest book. Kathleen and I published a book in September called Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers.
Yes, and actually Kathleen's going to be on the program in a month or so.
Oh, well.
So very excited about that.
Good interview and a serious researcher. We're sort of an unusual combination, a physical scientist and a social scientist dealing with controversy. We're both Leos, though, so we get along.
Are you really? Interesting. All right.
Yeah,
and well, you have that sort of... Yeah, well, you have that sort of tenacity. Some people might shy away from challenging or even challenging their own work, but you don't.
No, we're good. As a matter of fact, I'm still going strong. I added my 19th country, Bulgaria, several months ago.
Really? My wife is actually from Bulgaria. Zdrasti, как si?
My goodness.
So what?
I was in
yeah,
Sofia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. She went to the University of Sofia there.
Small world, because it's a small country.
It is. It is.
Of course, I live in a small province in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada.
So what did you learn about Bulgaria?
I was intrigued. Didn't get much of a chance to look around, but the Bulgarian Academy of Scientists was involved in promoting the program.
That is fantastic. Well, she'd be thrilled.
So I was very pleased with the reception, and I've been to Hungary and a lot of other countries, but Bulgaria is the most recent, and always looking for a new country. I mean, I've spoken in strange places. Saudi Arabia, how's that? And Turkey and Israel and Finland. And, of course, Brazil and Argentina and Australia, China, Korea. So I get around. And I mentioned this not to brag, but to point out that I've had a chance to put my finger on the pulse of a lot of different places.
Yeah.
And I get people asking me sometimes, how come UFOs are only seen in the United States? And I'm quick to disagree with that assessment, in other words, because they're seen all over the world and people are interested all over the world. And, to give you an example of that, the International UFO Museum and Research Center in Roswell, New Mexico, a town of about 50,000 people, last year had 205,000 visitors at the museum. And Roswell is in the middle of nowhere. It's 200 miles from Albuquerque, 200 miles from El Paso, 200 miles from Amarillo. So if you're there, it's because you want to be there. And they've had people from all over the world show up there because people are interested. In other words, it isn't easy. It's not directly on the way to any place. I say this because what I find is that people have a private and a public face about UFOs. When I check my audiences at the end of my lecture, I often ask how many people here believe they've seen what I would consider to be a flying saucer. I prefer the term flying saucer because all flying saucers are UFOs. Very few UFOs are flying saucers. All great-grandfathers are men, but not all men are great-grandfathers. So I like flying saucers, But when I ask at the end of my lecture how many have seen one, and I'll make a joke, we didn't let the CIA in, it's okay, just raise your hand and no names, we'll point and count. So I do that, and it's typically, much to their surprise, 10% of the people in the audience believe they've seen one. I've defined my terms in my lecture. But then I ask a different question. How many of you reported what you saw? About 90% of the hands go down.
Right.
When I ask people why they didn't report, they'd say they'd think I was some kind of a nut. Well, I do a couple of other things that gives you a sense of what's going on. I will ask if, when there's still people left, how many of you were in the military at the time? If there's still somebody left, I will ask, do you want to tell us about it? One guy in front of 1,300 people said, I can't. They told me not to say anything, which was a great line. Another guy says, they took my pictures. Long silence. Well, I'm sure the audience would like to hear the rest of the story. Everybody claps. I'm not asking your name. You don't need to stand up. Somebody got him a microphone. He told about being a pilot in the Air Force, flying a 4-engine plane across the Pacific. Plane 20 miles ahead, radios back, a saucer heading your way. They had gun cameras. They took pictures. They radioed the base to which they were flying, told them they had film. When they landed, the film got taken. They got debriefed and told never to say anything. Very impressive. And so what I'm saying is, in the real world, there are lots of good cases that nobody knows about. And I'm trying to bring some people out of the closet. And it surprises people that I've only had 11 hecklers in over 700 lectures, and 2 of them were drunk. And you get that many if you talk about sports, religion, politics, whatever. And I come on very, very strong. I'm not wishy-washy. I'm not an apologist, ufologist. That's a neat phrase. I don't think I made it up. But, and what I find is that coming on strong doesn't get in the way of people's acceptance. It helps. I'm convinced that, one, the evidence is overwhelming that planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled extraterrestrial spacecraft. In other words, some, underline 33 times, some UFOs are alien spacecraft. Most are not. I don't care about them. Secondly, I'm convinced we're dealing with a cosmic Watergate. I worked under security for 14 years, and I know there are people who tell you governments can't keep secrets. Dr. Neil deGrasse Tyson, at a talk at Penn State University, said the proof that the government can't keep secrets is how much we know about President Clinton's genitalia. Ha ha ha. The proof that they can keep secrets is the fact that you can get, you can't now because they've lost the originals, they say, but I have 156 pages of top secret Umbra NSA UFO documents. Wow, there's a little problem. You can only read one sentence per page. Everything else is whited out. I got lots of top secret Umbra CIA UFO documents, all blacked out.
Mm-hmm.
Can't keep secrets? Of course they can keep secrets. And the proof of that, and from a different direction, when Condon, Edward U. Condon of the University of Colorado study, Dr. Condon, completed the study, he recommended that Project Blue Book be closed. Well, the Air Force asked an Air Force general, an engineer, Carol Bolender, he worked on the Lunar Excursion Module. This was 1969, the year we landed on the moon. They asked him, what should we do about flying saucers? He had no previous connection with the question. He wrote a memo, which we didn't see until 10 years later, that resulted in the closure of Project Blue Book, which started in the early 50s, and this was 1969 was the end of the road for them. In this memo, he made two shocking statements. First, reports of UFOs which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. What? Where'd that come from? You know, the Air Force had been saying all the time, Blue Book, that's it, it's the only one. Second thing, 2 paragraphs later, he says if we close Project Blue Book, the public won't have a place to report UFOs. However, as previously noted, reports which could affect national security will continue to be investigated using the procedures designed for that purpose. That's totally out of the blue. The Air Force always said the Blue Book was it. That ain't nothing else. And so I decided I wanted to talk to General Bolender, which I could then. He was still alive. I managed to locate him. It's a lot easier to locate Carol Bolender than Alan Smith, for example. And I talked to him on the phone, telling him that I'd give him some background. I'm a nuclear physicist, had a security clearance for 14 years, etc. And I was very impressed with his memo. And I said, it seems to me you're saying that there were 2 separate communication channels here. One is for reports which could affect national security. I told him about somebody just a couple of weeks before telling me about a saucer going down the runway at a SAC base where nuclear weapons were stored. I said, seems to me that's clearly a case for national security, isn't it? He agreed. I said, on the other hand, if my wife and I are driving down the street and we see a UFO, big deal, happens all the time. He agreed. 2 separate communication channels. Now that raises the obvious question. Where's the good stuff go if it didn't go to Project Blue Book?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I have an answer for that question. Operation
What is the answer?
Majestic 12. Or, Operation Majestic 12. I'm sure the name has changed when classified terminology gets put out in the open. You change it. I mean, you know.
Wait, I've heard the argument. Yeah, I've heard the argument that actually the military can keep secrets. If you separate that from the government, do you think that's true, and do you think magic falls in that category?
Well, there are a lot of people who can keep secrets. So my work in industry was all done under industrial auspices and was all classified. It wasn't black, the ones I worked on. In other words, the sign on the door said General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department, but all the reports I wrote were classified. You needed a clearance to get inside, and I couldn't talk about it except to other people who had a clearance and need to know. So lots of people, the intelligence community is not necessarily military. there are military intelligence people. Hey, the Washington Post said about 4 years ago now, the military intelligence budget, or the government intelligence budget, was $52.6 billion the previous year. Mostly NSA, CIA, and NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. That's a lot of money, man.
That's huge. Yeah.
So we're not talking about a few guys off in a corner, a think tank. We're talking about a major effort.
Yeah, and they're still wanting more money. I mean, there are a lot of people that want to keep pumping money into the complex. Yeah.
Well, yeah. The point is, governments can keep secrets. They keep them all the time. And when I've had a professor say, "Well, Stan, look, with the internet and YouTube, nobody can keep any secrets," as if classified stuff were published in those places. It isn't. One of the strange arguments made about MJ12 it lists the number of the names of the people on the original group a long time ago. They're all dead. But says surely they would have told their wives what they were doing. No way. You never. And I've talked about this to other people who've had clearances. We all agreed. You don't tell your wife anything that's classified. It would be ridiculous to do so, besides being a violation of the law, you understand.
Yeah, I think that's a bit naive to assume that someone would just go home and even if they love that person, they're close with them, that's just not, that's antithetical to their duty, so they just simply wouldn't do it.
You can lose your job. You can be sent to prison for releasing classified information.
Which in turn hurts the person that you care for, yeah.
That's right, and let's face it, you cannot tell your friends without telling your enemies. They read the newspapers, they listen to the radio programs. I mean, don't people realize that we want to know what the other guys are doing and they want to know what we're doing? And anybody who thinks there aren't any spies in the United States is terribly naive.
Sure. Well, actually, to avoid political commentary at all costs, what do you think about Trump? Do you think that he is interested in this at all? Is there anything to show that he might want to investigate the UFO phenomena at all, or no?
That's a very legitimate question. I have not a bit of information on which to base a conclusion. Although I will tell you this: when I first heard about his being a candidate, and as the campaign wore on, my feeling was, I can't imagine him being willing to follow the dictates of security. He seems to want to say whatever he wants to say, wherever he wants to say it, and act with whatever the rules are.
Sure. And, I mean, there seem to be some legitimate concerns for that. But I guess there really is nothing out there to say that he has any interest in it at all, right?
I haven't seen anything. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But usually somebody would say to me, "Hey, did you hear what Trump said the other day?" or something like that. And so I have seen no indication of interest. He certainly has chomped down on a huge number of different topics. I mean, he listens to the television programs. That tells him what's going on in the world. Isn't that his major source of information? Somebody said something on yesterday like that.
Yeah, I mean, apparently it is. But, it's... and I guess if that's the case, and you are the military or MJ-12, assuming something like that is still in existence, you may not tell that person, right?
That's right. I mean, people think presidents have access to everything. They don't.
Yeah.
One of the reasons is presidents are answering questions from newsmen all the time. So the less information he has stuffed in his head that could be released with danger to the country, the better off we are, even from his viewpoint. What he doesn't know can't hurt you, is one way to look at it. And who knows?
Sure.
There are people talking about there's going to be disclosure. I've heard that for 20 years.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of data out there to convince one of the conclusions that I reached. Aliens are visiting. There's a cosmic Watergate. No good arguments against those two, and we're dealing with the biggest story of the millennium. And that's, people are shocked. The usual response at my lectures is I get asked loads of questions, and typically are the why questions. And the usual response is, "Oh, I hadn't thought of it that way." Well, I've given over 700 lectures. I got to think about these things, and you have to have an answer now. Not, I'll get back to you next week. If you're on a lecture, or on a radio show, or a television show, or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I've had to think about these things, and I'm an old guy. I've been thinking about it for a long time.
That's actually. I was thinking about that. Do you ever get tired of trying to? I don't know if convince is the right word. Maybe it is, but trying to go against the scientific establishment in general, not everyone, and prove your point that there is an actual phenomena going on.
I don't get tired of doing it. I'll tell you one thing, though. I designed most of my lectures to make it... A person would have to think twice about asking me a nasty question. I'll give you an example. I was at the Gulf Research Lab in Pittsburgh. I was giving a dinner talk. And as soon as I started, a guy interrupted me. Why don't you talk about something or other? And I said, I'll be talking about that later. And a second time, and a third time. And finally, the boss man said, let him finish. So I did finish and turned to him. Well, he said, I'm sure that one could come to other conclusions than the ones you've come to. I said, well, let me see now. As I recall, you hadn't raised your hand after I asked who had read each of the 5 large-scale scientific studies that I talked about, right? Well, yes. I said, well, that's the difference between us, isn't it? I give you my conclusions. I give you the sources of data on which I base my conclusions. I've read them all. You've read none of them. Whose viewpoint is worth more? Long silence. So I wasn't unpleasant, nasty about it, just factual. But I don't feel I have to give everybody a platform if they have demonstrated that they haven't studied the evidence.
Well, and the same should be true in reverse, right?
Well, that's right. And I occasionally do colloquia on campus before giving an evening lecture. A physics group or some professional group. Mm-hmm. And I'll hear from a student that, Dr. Jones thinks this is all baloney. So I start by talking about things I know they don't know anything about, like the electromagnetic submarine and the nuclear rocket, stuff like that. And then I'll ask, here's a question for you. What's the numerical value of 1G acceleration? 9.8 meters per second squared. I said, yeah, that's true, but let's relate it to a Chevrolet. It's 21 miles per hour per second. That's 1G. So if you accelerate a car at 3 Gs at the end of 3 seconds, you're going 63 miles an hour. And that's pretty darn good, because most cars take 4, 5, 6 seconds to get to that speed. And then I'll say, what's the speed of light? 300,000 kilometers per second. Well, again, in useful units, it's 670 million miles an hour. I said, now the real question is, how long does it take at 1G to get to the speed of light? It's a multiple choice question, guys. 1,000 years, 100 years, 10 years, or 1? How many think it's 1,000? And it's quite a few. And how many think it's 100? How many think it's 10? The right answer is 1. It only takes 1 year at 1G. But when I finish that, you see, it's clear that the professors don't know these things at all. So it keeps down the noise. And that's how I got into this, finally doing a lecture about astronomy and UFOs, which I gave International UFO Congress in Arizona this past week. Because there's a problem here. For reasons unknown, I suppose because things are seen in the sky, astronomers get asked their opinion about flying saucers. And almost invariably, they don't know anything about them, but they're quite willing to express an opinion. And there are several different areas in which their ignorance becomes quite painfully obvious. One of them is you can't get here from there. And everywhere you turn, somebody's saying, the next civilization over has got to be hundreds of light years away, or it's from another galaxy. This is nonsense. A couple of numbers to illustrate the problem. The Kepler spacecraft has been looking for planets. Beautiful job, very sensitive system. And they have come to the conclusion that there's between 1 and 1.6 planets per star. Now, to convert that to reality, within 100 light years of here, there are 10,000 stars. That means there's between 10,000 and 16,000 planets within 100 light years. So why would anybody say the nearest civilization that could be, they don't say why they'd be sending signals to us to attract our attention because we're so important, Hey, what do the guys on Earth think about this? Who would ask that?
Right. Well, and they used to actually, presume that we would be looking for Earth-like, sun-like stars, but actually we know that planets don't necessarily need to be habitable with a star like ours. It could be a dwarf star or something like that, right?
Right. Well, that's why I say it's kind of astonishing when you say between 1 and 1.6 planets per star of all stars. And one thing I sometimes get is, you have to come here from another galaxy. They don't seem to know the difference between a solar system and a galaxy. Andromeda is 2 million light years away. Who cares? Tell me about Zeta Reticuli, 39 light years away.
So, essentially what you're saying, though, is using rocket, jet fuel propulsion, you could, the incremental increase or exponential increase in speed, you could actually get to the nearest star in 1 year. If you were to ask that question to someone at JPL NASA. Oh, I'm sorry.
I didn't say that. No,
okay.
I say you can get to the speed of light in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
And at 99.99% of the speed of light, you can go 37 light years in 6 months. Pilot time. People want half an Einstein. Speed of light's the limit, but they forget about, as you get close to the speed of light, time slows down for things moving that fast. It all depends. Everything about space depends. And there are a whole bunch of other things. We do a lot of cosmic freeloading, which may sound like a peculiar term, but we've got the Cassini spacecraft out at Saturn, and we sent it first toward Venus. Venus gave it a kick as it went by. It came back past Earth, got another kick, went past Jupiter and got another kick. So it didn't have to provide all the energy, be in the right place at the right time, and away you go. It only makes sense when you look at it from an engineering viewpoint. So space travel, and also you mentioned chemical jets and all that sort of stuff. Well, I worked on a study of fusion propulsion for deep space travel in 1962. Now, for those who don't know it, fusion is the major source of energy in all of our lives and throughout the universe. That's what goes on in the stars. They are not a mass of burning gas. They are fusion factories, if you will.
Okay, Stan, hold it right there. We're actually going to take a quick break. Hate to interrupt you, and we'll be right back. Pick it up from there. You're listening to Paranormal Now with Stanton Friedman, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Paranormal Now on the Inception Radio Network. You can listen to other great shows on the Inception Radio Network by going to inceptionradionetwork.com. Of course, you can listen to us by downloading the IRN app on your smartphone or going to Stitcher or iTunes, TuneIn, and you can listen to the many, many other great programs. And if you want to follow me, that'd be awesome. You can find me on @ParanormalNow on Instagram, as well as Paranormal Now Radio on Facebook. Those are the two places I'll be hanging out the most, and I'd love to hear your feedback and even your criticisms. If you have any suggestions for future hosts or shows, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in. I appreciate it. So my guest is Stanton Friedman, author and researcher, physicist, the man who broke wide open the UFO Roswell case and set decades worth of research and authors and books and movies and television shows, for better or for worse, into motion. Stanton definitely had an effect on the validity of ufology and the research associated with it, as well as probably inadvertently having an effect on my life. I mean, I grew up in the 90s and I watched shows like Sightings and X-Files. And of course, aside from my own personal experience, that definitely set in motion an intrigue that has not left me. So Stanton, we left off talking about deep space travel.
Yes, and nuclear fusion as the first thing you'd want to get to. Now, people say, what is he talking? A-bombs? people have heard more about the crazy Orion program, which where you carry along a bunch of H-bombs, and you dump one out the back and set it off when it's a certain distance away, and it releases a lot of energy, and you have a pusher plate at the back of your rocket, and off you go. And then you do another one, you keep accelerating. I don't like the thought of using nuclear weapons like that. However, if you use hydrogen and helium and use the right reactions, there are a number of different ones that go on in the sun and the stars and so forth, you can kick particles out the back end of a fusion rocket that have 10 million times as much energy per particle as they can get in a dumb old chemical rocket. So, my mantra is that technological progress comes from doing things differently in an unpredictable way. The future is not an extrapolation of the past. I mean, look, going around the planet. Hey, old Magellan was the first one. His ship took 3 years to go around the planet. And then we get to Captain Nemo, 80 days around the world in 80 days. Magellan was in 1523, and so he didn't make it. The ship did, but he didn't. Some natives took a dislike to him on an island he landed at. Today, we go around the world with the space station. It takes 95 minutes. That's doing things differently from sailing a big ship. And, I'm looking at a fancy computer equipment here. It isn't very fancy, but what would it have been worth 50 years ago if you could have put something on?
Oh, my gosh.
Incredible. And
you could be a billionaire overnight with that, yeah.
Yeah, so you got to change how you do things. A micro-integrated circuit is not just a small vacuum tube. I hope some people listening know what a vacuum tube is.
Actually, it's funny. I had this vacuum tube that I held from. It was something left over from my grandfather, and I was so fascinated with the shape and design of it. I just kept it just to sort of look at.
Yeah,
it was so interesting. Yeah.
Well, we went from vacuum tubes to transistors to integrated circuits, and there's Moore's law. You can roughly double the number of transistors you can fit on a micro-integrated circuit every year or two, which doesn't sound like much, but when that goes on for 40 years, you can see that it's still going on, the efficiency. And the smaller, the less energy, and the faster, because the particles don't have to travel very far, et cetera. So the world has changed drastically within our lifetime. I mean, look at history. We didn't discover the neutron until 1932, and I will guarantee you that there were neutrons before 1932. The fact that we hadn't found them didn't mean they weren't there. It was an aspect of our ignorance. And we didn't discover fission and fusion until 1938. Now, to see the progression, that gives some sense of what difference it makes if you go to a better way of doing things. In 1944, a big bomb was a 10-ton blockbuster, released the energy of 10 tons of dynamite. And a little pound stick of dynamite will make a heck of a mess out of a room, So, blockbuster, 1944, 10 tons, and it took a big B-29 to carry it. 1945, the first fission device, and I worked on fission rockets, but that's another story in a moment, released the energy of 16,000 tons of dynamite, from 10 to 16,000. 1952, the first fusion device, H-bomb, if you will, released the energy of 10 million tons of dynamite. One stinking weapon. And the Russians sent one off, big one, 57 million tons of dynamite. One lousy weapon. You begin to see why it makes a difference what method you choose.
Sure, but I feel like we've sort of go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just going to say, I will guarantee you every civilization will get to a point where it wants to know how its star works. And when it figures that out, let her rip. Because and why people would be concerned about us, beings out there, maybe I should say people. Nuclear fusion is a weapon of destruction, and it's also a weapon of propulsion. And I believe that everybody in the neighborhood is concerned about the idiots on this planet. I mean, look at our track record. Our big war, we only killed 50 million people. We destroyed 1,700 cities. We have exploded, believe it or not, 2,000 nuclear weapons on this planet. Would anybody out there want us to take our brand of friendship, hostility, out there? I mean, the military budget on the planet, it's probably gone up since I last heard, but it's about $1 trillion this year.
Yeah, I guess you can't pass it off as fireworks either.
No. So what I'm saying is these concepts, nuclear fusion in particular, that has the beautiful attribute. Fission requires something like uranium, one of the heavier elements. Fusion requires hydrogen and helium, which just handily happen to be the lightest substances and the most abundant substances in the universe. Everywhere you go, you're going to find hydrogen. In other words, you don't need to bring your own. It's there. Uranium, on the other hand, even though the Earth is the densest planet in the solar system, I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the ground. Cubic foot of Earth weighs more than a cubic foot of any of our other planets. Right. And you say, so what? That means it's got more of things like uranium, rhenium, osmium, platinum, these heavy and specialized elements. Mm-hmm. So they may be mining the goodies here, for all I know. Why not?
Oh, that leads me to my next question, was what is the next big thing as far as propulsion goes?
Well, look, as I said, I did a study, involved in a study in 1962 on fusion. Now, fission is a bit easier, and I was working on fission nuclear rockets in the late 60s. And 3 different organizations tested them on the ground. I worked for Westinghouse Astronuclear Lab in Pittsburgh. Our nuclear rocket engine system, the NRX-A6, was tested out at the nuclear test site out near Vegas, 1968. Operated at a power level of 1,100 megawatts. What does that mean? Well, Hoover Dam produces 2,000 megawatts. Aerojet General had one that operated at a power level of 1,000 megawatts. And dear old Los Alamos operated the Phoebus 2B at a power level of 4,400 megawatts, twice the power of Hoover Dam, and it was less than 8 feet in diameter. The temperature, the hydrogen comes in, liquid hydrogen, very cold, and goes out very hot, over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And after these successful tests, they canceled the program.
What would be the reason for that? Why would they do that?
Because, well, we didn't have enough money. There was a recession. Who knows? Maybe the aliens said, "Stop that darn stuff, you guys. We don't want your mess out here." I don't know. If you have a nuclear upper stage fission when you go to Mars, you could triple the payload to get there. And what I'm saying is, these things are real. I worked on them. We listened over the PA system as the successful test was conducted, and finest moment I had in industry. It worked. I had some measurements on that because they'd come to me 2 weeks before the test. Hey, we need to know whether we're going to melt our control elements. Can you give me some information on nuclear heating rates? So I managed to get it done 3 days later, and I realized when the test started a couple weeks after that, hey, if this thing doesn't work, they're going to blame me. It did work.
I was just going to ask, did you get blamed?
No.
Good.
It was one of those things you don't think about, and then suddenly you realize, holy cow, I got a lot riding on this. I think what I did was correct.
Anyway, earlier you mentioned actually magnetic propulsion. Yeah.
What?
Earlier you mentioned magnetic propulsion with the submarine, something along those lines. What happened there?
Well, okay. There are two parts to the propulsion story. How do you get from star A to star B, where there's a lot of nothing in between? Mm-hmm. And then once you get to star B, how do you zip around in the atmosphere? Because the situation is altogether different. You got a strong gravitational field, you got atmospheric pressure, you got drag, you got heating, weather, you got all kinds of problems. So I believe we have the direct analog. The United States Navy and a couple of others have nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, huge old monsters, and they can operate for 18 years without refueling. Wouldn't it be nicer as a ship captain if you don't need to go to the gas station for 18 years?
18
now, they
years.
carry several dozen tiny airplanes, tiny by comparison, which can operate for, 2 hours before they need refueling on a good day. So, two-stage system, mothership and little Earth excursion module, if you will. That's where the magnetohydrodynamics comes in. And I'll tell you, there have to be people interested. Back in 1970, I got hired by McDonnell Douglas. My job was supposed to be to figure out how flying saucers work. And I'm driving across the country when they canceled the program, but they kept me for 3 months. How'd you like to walk in with your job offer in hand? You realize, Mr. Friedman, we just laid off 5,000 people. Yes, I realize that. But one of the things I did do was a literature search on government documents, one key word, magnetohydrodynamics. And much to my surprise, actually, we got 900 references. 90% of them were classified. So somebody was spending a lot of money on that.
90% were classified. That's a lot.
That's right. Yeah. Oh. But who was spending the money? I don't know. And the electromagnetic submarine is a direct analog, and somebody says, that guy's crazy. What submarine's got to do with flight in the atmosphere? Well, seawater is an electrically conducting fluid. And we have two different groups, one at Westinghouse and one in Japan, have actually built electromagnetic submarines. And how does that work? Well, because it's an electrically conducting fluid, you can send a current from one side to the other, and you do other things. You can set up a magnetic field at right angles to the electric field. And there's a law of physics that says if you have electric and magnetic fields at right angles to each other, you have a force at right angles to both. You push against the electrically conducting fluid, seawater or ionized air, and it pushes back. It's one of Newton's laws. For every force, there's an equal and opposite force. And off you go, no moving parts. And we, as a matter of fact, there was even a study done. If you send a craft to Mars, when it comes back, the heating, when it hits the atmosphere, is going to be pretty substantial. And that means you got to carry that heat shield along. Dead weight. Well, we don't want to do that. What else could we do? They did a study of using an appropriately configured magnetic field to interact with the plasma that you're going to create, the electrically conducting fluid. When that hits the air, it's going to ionize. And we know that, remember when the lunar jaunts were on? When they come back, there's a period of silence there because it creates a plasma and you can't get your electric signals through the plasma.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that's a realistic, and they said the weight of the all the gear would be less than the weight of the heat shield you'd need in the absence of the plasma. But of course, they never sent anything to Mars to come back yet, which is terribly disappointing. When I and a lot of other people working on the space program back umpteen years ago, we all thought we'd have a base on the moon by now, and certainly would have gone to Mars.
Yeah, you would think it would have at least have sampled and returned.
Yeah, I mean, maybe somebody told us stay the heck off our planet. Who knows? I don't know. I know there are people saying there's a secret space program, Stan. You don't know anything about it. That's true. I don't. So how could I talk about it if I don't know anything about it?
Yeah. And I guess right now the space program's kind of up in the air.
Well, or in space, as the case may be, or not in space. I just saw an article. India launched over 100 satellites last year.
Gosh. Wow.
And China's, sending stuff to Mars and stuff. We don't have an aggressive space program. And, we're too busy trying to kill each other. I say that not happily. I'm not saying everything that people want to do in space is the thing to do, but we have learned enough to know that we can do those things. I can just see Columbus talking to Queen Isabella. What's the point of all this, Chris? Well, it could be immense wealth for the country, couldn't it? Ah, come on. Well, look at all the reasons, all the good that came out of going to the Western world. Mm-hmm. We converted some heathens. We brought back some slaves. We got new vegetables, potatoes.
Sure.
Tomatoes.
I mean, if you want to make the argument that democracy is a wonderful thing, that's great. But how we went about doing it is not exactly a wonderful thing.
No, you may have noticed that. Huh? You mean you don't think we should impose our will on everybody else?
Yeah, no, not so much.
No.
And
no.
I think that this idea that going out to space and having a strong space program would actually perpetuate scientific research and advancements which trickled down makes sense, especially back in the 60s and 70s. But do you feel like that holds up as true now?
No, I think we need the important reason to go into space is not only because there are problems here on Earth that would benefit from our doing things in space, and maybe we'd want to colonize or whatever, but much more importantly, we know that there are beings out there coming here. How do we join the Galactic Federation? What happens if we do go out there? Maybe the reason we haven't gone is that somebody said, we don't want you out there, buddy. Get your act together.
You're absolutely convinced then that we're actually being visited?
No question about it. Look, we're not talking about lights in the sky. I don't care about lights in the sky. I do care about physical trace cases, multiple witness radar visual sightings.
And there are, yeah.
Yeah, and I do care about the government has lied a number of times. I mean, a lie that I read in many of my lectures that I recite. The Secretary of the Air Force,
mm-hmm.
when the largest study ever done was completed, Project Blue Book Special Report 14, 1955, he said, on the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those properly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. Even the unknown 3% could have been identified as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been available. Well, I had the report. The unknowns weren't 3%, or 4, or 6, or 8, or 12. They were 21.5%. And they were not, by definition, the ones for which there wasn't enough data. There was a separate category for this. I don't like being lied to by the Secretary of the Air Force. That's not the only thing.
When you're lied to... Yeah, when you're lied to, it actually begs the question of, okay, so why are you lying? Which would seem to indicate that you're covering something up.
Yes, and there are many examples of that. I mean, you could arrange to get the 150. Well, I'm not sure you can arrange to get them anymore, but I managed to get from NSA, National Security Agency, 156 top secret Umbra UFO documents, which you could read one sentence per page. Everything else was whited out. But there's no cover-up, Stan. I had people call me, say they're releasing it. I said, can you read what's under the whiteout? Well, no, then they're not releasing it. And we got a whole bunch of blacked-out CIA top-secret documents. 5 words on a page. You're covering up. I don't care how.
Well, I guess the argument always is, of course, there's other things in the document that have nothing to do with UFOs. They just can't release that information. It's people's names or it's case numbers or whatever.
Well, it's easy to black out stuff. The CIA released over 600 pages up through secret. This is decades ago. And so I know that you got to selectively black out, white out, etc. The reason they went to white out, this is funny. I had heard that the NSA was going to be releasing a new version of this stuff because there had been a change in presidential executive orders. And so I called the NSA and said, I understand you're going to be releasing a new batch of UFO documents. Yes, sir. Can I get a copy? Indeed. What's your name? Stanton Friedman. Oh, we know all about you. What? It's kind of strange to hear the NSA say they know all about you. I said, oh, how's that? Well, Mr. Klass told us that when we earlier put out our justification for not releasing these documents, that you used to show it on television and say we're covering things up. It was all blacked out, and you'd turn pages. And I said, yes, I did do that, indeed. So that's why we decided to white out instead of black out. like people won't
It
realize.
looks less ominous or something. I mean, yeah.
I guess. So I got a set, and I can take credit for it.
All right. So we were saving on black ink. Great. Good job, Stan.
Well, the funny thing is now you can't. They say they've lost the original set. People have asked for another set of the whited out documents. And, well, the response after a while was, we can't find the original, sorry. Well, you know,
but there you go. I mean, right. I try to wonder, what if, do any of these scientists that vehemently, argue, debunk the UFO phenomena, do they do any of the work first that you do, and then come to you and say, I still disagree?
Very rare. Very rare. They don't do their homework. That's one of the reasons I'm so clever about asking after I talk about, say, Blue Book Special Report 14. How many people here have read this? I'm lucky if I get one or two at a lecture who've read any of them. It's incredible. Ignorance is bliss, I guess. And I think that's one of the reasons I don't get any more nasty, debunking questions. I was puzzled. One of the strangest debunking thing, a guy gets up at the end of my talk, well dressed, and I don't care who gets up first man up, gets the microphone, and he said, you said that in the Betty and Barney Hill case that they were taken on board a craft and they went to Zeta Reticuli and back in 2 hours. I said, no, sir. What I said was they were on board for 2 hours. They didn't go anywhere. And he gave two or three more of these completely false statements. And somebody in the audience said, how about taking some sensible questions? This guy gets up and he walks out. Yeah. And I said, I'll answer your question, but who was that? I obviously rubbed him the wrong way. He was a professor of physics. He didn't hear what I had to say at all.
Yeah, and I think what frustrates me is that, on a program like this, yes, we do a lot of speculative, topics and things like that. And a lot of that is just sort of exactly what that is, speculative. Some of it times it's just fun to talk about. But in this case, if you're going to hold somebody else up to the scientific standard and method, then you too should follow that method as well.
Right.
I have a lot of you're supposed to either prove or disprove your own theory, and if I understand it best, you're supposed to disprove your own theory. So if your theory is UFOs don't exist, that means you have a tremendous amount of work to do in order to prove not just to say it was a flock of geese.
Well, yeah, and that's why I refer to the large-scale scientific studies. I mean, Blue Book Special Report 14, for example, had cross comparisons between the unknowns, the only ones we're interested in, and the knowns. Maybe we just missed the boat on the screening process, 3,200 sightings. They did the chi-square analysis. It's a standard way of looking at, do these two populations match? Mm-hmm. The result was the probability that the unknowns are misknowns is less than 1%. They also did a quality evaluation of all the sightings. They found the better the quality of the sighting, because of the background of the observer, the circumstances, the duration of observation, etc., the more likely to be unexplainable. So these are facts tending to point in the direction of reality. There's strange things moving around, not only that we can't identify, but whose characteristics are different from the things we can identify. And it's not just one or two cases. But they're only seen for a few seconds. Nonsense. The longer the duration of the sighting, the more likely to be unexplainable. I mean, the data is there. I was really shook up when I got to that study. I just happened to find it at the UC Berkeley Library. And it hadn't been mentioned in any of the 10 books that I'd read. And holy cow, then I see this press release, which was included in the Secretary of the Air Force line. That got me mad. I mean, I worked under security and learned to tiptoe around the truth sometimes. But this was absurd. You can't just say something that would make your argument without having evidence to go with it. So my basic rule is facts in hand before putting mouth in gear. I wish more people would do that.
Yes, I agree. And Stan, we're going to take one last break. We're going to be right back with Stanton Friedman on the Inception Radio Network, and this is Paranormal Now. I'm your host, Alan B. Smith. Stay tuned. Quick break, and then I'm going to ask Stan I don't know, I guess you could say it's a controversial, or maybe a better yet, a heated question. Okay, we'll be right back.
Hello, Inception Radio Network listeners. This is Amanda. Remember, you can take your Inception Radio shows on the go. Just download the Inception Radio Network app for your iPhone, iPad, or Android smartphones and access live shows, past shows, guest lineups, and much more. Just visit the iTunes Store or the Google Play Marketplace and download it today for free.
And welcome back to Paranormal Now. My guest is Stanton Friedman, co-author of Fact, Fiction, and Flying Saucers with Kathleen Martin. Stanton, I have a question for you. What do you think of Bob Lazar?
About Robert Lazar?
Mm-hmm.
Robert Scott Lazar?
Bob Lazar, yes.
That guy, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a longer story than you might think. I was asked about him 25 years ago because George Knapp was talking about him, and he was claiming to be a nuclear physicist, and people knowing that I was one were asking me about him. Well, I didn't feel I should express an opinion until I did some checking. So I did some checking. The simplest stuff, I looked in the directories of the American Physical Society, the American Nuclear Society, American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I belong to all three. They have directories, and he isn't in any of them. Well, that raised a question. Then I was told that he got his master's in physics at MIT and another master's at Caltech. I don't want to get those two mixed up. And so I checked with MIT and I checked with Caltech. MIT, never heard of him. I talked to 5 different people, the registrar and the physics department and the people who keep track of diplomas and stuff like that. Not a sign. There was nothing at Caltech either.
And if I may interject, for those who are not familiar with Bob Lazar, he was actually he had in the 90s, right? Was it 89, 90, something like that?
Yes.
He claimed to have worked in the infamous Area 51 and had access to recovered UFO craft.
Yeah, and that he also said Los Alamos had 500 pounds of element 115, and he worked on trying to back engineering. They had several of them there, and so forth. So George Knapp gave me the name of Bob's high school, so I called them. And she said, well, I can check his records, call me back, and I did. And interesting conversation. I hadn't typed it because I had no knowledge of what would happen, just get more information. Well, it turns out he graduated in August from high school there, which normally means he flunked something along the way, Then I said, well, he did take a lot of science courses, didn't he? Chemistry. What else? Just chemistry. Then I did something I'm not proud of, but I was getting a little irritated. I got accepted at MIT out of high school a long time ago. I was valedictorian of my high school class in New Jersey. And I got accepted, and several of my friends did too, but I couldn't afford to go. The tuition was $900 a year. Now it's 27,000 or something. So I resented the fact that he said he went there, but there's no indication that he did. So, okay, I'm talking to this high school gal, and I said, well, he was valedictorian, wasn't he? And she laughed. No, he was not valedictorian. Was he in the top 10? No. More laughter. Top 20, top 50, top 100? No. And then she told me where we ranked because it was so funny to have to go through this. Like 265 out of 360. Bottom third of the class. Well, there is no way to get into MIT if you're in the bottom third of your class. Top 15% typically. So I did that much checking. And I checked looking for papers by him and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I had a call from Gene Huff, his buddy, who says, what would it take to convince you, Stan? It was a friendly call. It wasn't nasty. I said, well, I'd like to see a diploma, a copy of a diploma. I'd like to see a resume, a list of his papers. Oh, okay. So I sent him, I had an 8-page resume around at that time, professional, and pages of directories with my name in them, proving that I was a member of these groups and was a graduate of the University of Chicago, etc. Never got anything back. So, another example, Bob was answering questions at the infamous Little Alien at Rachel, Nevada, and somebody asked, can you name any of your professors? And he said, let's see now, Bill Duxler, he'll remember me from Caltech Physics. I heard a copy of this, and I checked my directory. Yeah, he was a member of the American Physical Society, all right. So I called him. Well, yes, he did have a PhD in physics, but he taught at Pierce Junior College, not Caltech. It's less than 30 miles away, but intellectually it's a lot farther than that. And I told him the story, and he checked. He didn't like his name being used, in other words. And it turned out he had Bob in a night physics course that he had, a night course that he'd taken at Pierce Junior College at the same time when he was supposedly at MIT, 2,500 miles away. So it was a flat-out lie. So I didn't know what else to do to check on Bob. Somebody else checked all the yearbooks at MIT for the years he was supposedly there. Couldn't find a mention of him anywhere.
Well, I guess the argument is his records were expunged, but let's just assume that's true.
I talked to the legal counsel about that. He was one of those 5 people. There ain't no way to do that. You're in so many places in the system. Remember, MIT's been doing classified work since the 40s, 1940s, and the legal counsel, I flat out asked about that.
Well, even if it's true, let's just assume that for a moment. Wouldn't Bob himself just have something in his personal files that would show, oh, here's an essay I did for so and so teacher, or here's a homework assignment, or something, a book taken out that you didn't return to the library,
Well, that's why I asked I asked the physics department. These are new people. This is, many years after he would have been there.
Right.
And they checked and can't find any record of him. The guy keeps diplomas. What's he got to lose?
Yeah, why wouldn't Bob disclose something of his own just to show, look, I did something here. I did this.
Well, that's a good question, and I don't have an answer for it. We had one telephone conversation. It was not unpleasant, brief. And, so people keep telling me things. I was there in Arizona last year when George interrogated Bob on the stage. I'd given a talk at that same conference. And it was interesting, but I could find nothing again to establish that he was a scientist. I know he worked at Los Alamos. His name was in the phone book. He worked at the accelerator facility. I checked. But that meant he had a security clearance, because you don't work there without a clearance.
So that's something.
And it's
right?
not just scientists. What?
So that's something.
Yes, he worked but it doesn't say he worked as a scientist there. You know, when I worked on General Electric Aircraft Nuclear Propulsion Department way back in the 50s, we employed 3,400 people, of whom 1,100 only were engineers and scientists. Roughly a third. So we all had clearances. But
because you all were exposed to information that, that was secret. So that makes sense, of course. I mean, I would assume even as, if you're working in a facility like that, as I'm not saying he was, but as a janitor or something like that, you would have to have some, clearance. Okay. Now, but I wonder, because I really like George Knapp a lot.
So do I.
So legit, but am I wrong in interpreting that he leans towards believing Bob Lazar's story?
No, you're not wrong. He certainly does lean toward. But he did tell me that he didn't believe Bob had the diplomas.
Right.
That he claimed. And to me, the next question will be, why do you believe anything he said if he lies about the thing that he knows the most about himself?
True. Well, I guess you can come up with a lot of justifications. I mean, sometimes when people are pressed against the wall, they will lie to defend their own truth.
Sure.
So maybe it's something like that. I don't know.
I'm not a psychologist. I'm a dumb physicist. I'm not going to try to explain to you why people do things.
Yeah, and even if you could, it still doesn't prove anything, really.
Right. So I did as much as I could to find out the facts about Bob.
Yeah.
And I don't know where else. I don't think anybody else has done any more than I have. It certainly has not come up with any evidence.
All right. Although I do remember, there was a time where he was able to, quote unquote, predict when you could see lights in the sky or UFOs flying at night. Yeah.
That is certainly true, and that affected John Lear. But the fact that Bob knew there were going to be some things flying around doesn't mean they were alien, and doesn't mean he was working on them. If somebody could say, hey, we run our tests on our new specials. They do test classified stuff out there. That's why it's there. It was originally, Area 51 was established to develop the U-2.
Mm-hmm.
That was before there were satellites. And so if you had a secure facility out away from the eye of the world, that's where you test stuff like that.
You could do pretty much
all
anything.
Kinds of other stuff. Yeah. Nobody would know. Now it's a little different, and you put stuff underground and so forth. Two good reasons for going underground: protect you against nuclear weapons, and so the other guy can't spy on what you're doing underground.
I guess that makes sense. Would that have anything to do with the tremors that people hear underground? Do you think that's just extraction?
Well, I think it's just extraction. Of course, we did test a lot of nuclear weapons underground, too. And we, as a matter of fact, used seismic techniques for knowing when the Russians were testing and them knowing when we were testing and so forth. On the underground stuff, you still produce a seismic signature. Doesn't that sound fancy?
Yeah. Hey, and even if they're doing some of the most high-profile tests underground, you still have, like you said earlier, all these witnesses that are seeing things in the sky still, and
and
there's so many witnesses. Oh, sure, there's so many witnesses that, like you said, their story's not heard. We're losing potentially quite a bit of evidence and circumstantial evidence, eyewitness accounts that could support the theory. But how do you get those people to come out and actually feel comfortable saying it?
Well, it's difficult. Some of them come up to me after my lectures. They didn't know there was anybody who was interested. But and I do try to present data that's showing that there are more believers than non-believers. The popular myth is that most people don't believe in flying saucers, so I better not say anything, they'll get laughed at. That's the myth. Look, I've been out there. I've stuck my neck. I've had 11 hecklers in over 700 lectures, and 2 of them were drunk. When you get that many, if you talk about sports, religion, politics, I'm told you get more than that. So I'll give you the results of a little experiment I did in the classroom, daytime talk before an evening program. I asked for the cooperation of the professors, and he agreed. So I wanted to ask 2 questions of the students and have the students keep their eyes closed and just raise their hands, and he would count the votes and not announce them. First question is, how many think most people don't believe in flying saucers? And he counted. And then the second question, how many of you do believe in flying saucers? Remember, they got their eyes closed, so they can't see what their friends are saying. In both cases, the answer was 80%.
Interesting.
80% thought most people didn't believe in UFOs, but 80% of them did.
So what do we get from that?
Well, we get that there's a widespread acceptance, and it's time that scientists started sticking their necks out a little bit and get acquainted with the evidence. Evidence trumps everything, as far as I'm concerned. And there have been courses taught. There have been over a dozen PhD theses done about UFOs. You never hear about them from the nasty, noisy negativists. This is kooks and quacks. That's what we're talking about here. And I particularly get upset with the SETI community. SETI stands for Silly Effort to Investigate. They provide not a tittle or a jot, one of those words, of evidence that aliens are sending signals to us. We got loads of data that aliens are visiting. Some UFOs are alien spacecraft. And we have loads of data that the government's covering up. It's not just blacked out documents and whited out documents, but lies. They put together a very clear picture. Dissimulation, is that the fancy word for lie?
Yeah, well, the SETI, do you think it's a waste anyway, or do you think there's something to be gained from it?
Well, okay. Radio waves are a window on the universe out there, so that we should look at radio signals to learn something is a good idea. But if you're saying aliens are trying to send us radio signals and we know what frequencies to listen to, and all kinds of elaborate theoretical constructs about what's going on, I say it's nonsense. Look, I debated Seth Shostak of the SETI Institute on Coast to Coast Radio.
Yes, that's a very well-known debate.
57, 33, 10. The 10% said, I don't know. But,
so you won by 57 to 33, you said?
Yes.
Okay.
I debated Michael Shermer. I got 80% of those because he didn't know anything. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up is the approach of the non-believers. And I'm strongly opposed to that viewpoint. You better bother with the facts or keep your mouth shut.
Well, it would be great if you could team up with a couple of others and have a public square debate with maybe 3 and 3, and have a fair, open debate and allow people to vote. People who aren't necessarily already
I'm willing.
have the proclivity to
I'm
believe.
Willing.
Yeah.
I have I take anybody on the subject. What is irksome is the people speaking out like Michael Shermer, king of the skeptics, so to speak, who haven't done any of their homework. And Seth, as a matter of fact, we each gave 3 lectures on the Queen Elizabeth II. We each got a free trip from England to New York. Kind of nice. We each listened to the other lectures, and we were cordial. This was not nastiness. When he was at one of my lectures, I asked, as I always do, how many people have read it. I give my 5 large-scale scientific studies, and he didn't raise his hand for any of them. Now, after the debate, I did ask him if I could send him a copy of my book, Flying Saucers in Science. Sure, he gave me the address. I sent it to him. And months later, on Coast to Coast, he was on. He was a frequent guest. And he did mention that he had a copy of my book on his nightstand. He didn't say he'd read it. SETI can't dare, apparently, to admit that aliens may be coming here, because if they're coming here, who needs to listen? Learn sign language.
But you would think they'd at least be able to say it's possible they're coming here. The evidence suggests that it's possible, even if they can't go as far as saying, yes, I believe.
Well, I don't mind if they say that. It would be nice if they would. But look, there's several, just a few areas where they really have no knowledge. One is how to get here from there. That has nothing to do with radio signals. That has to do with propulsion system and stuff. Well, they know about that. Second is government secrets. Again, they will try to tell you the governments can't keep secrets. Well, that's absurd. Another is, why would you ask them about motivation of aliens? I mean, who do you ask about motivation? You might ask a psychologist, a psychiatrist, maybe even a lawyer. He deals with a lot of different people, a doctor. But an astronomer? They deal with the inanimate, the non-intelligence involved things, the stars, the moons, the planets. They don't know why anybody would do anything. You might look, however, at the explorers to the New World. Why did people go to the New World? Some to get gold, some to convert heathens, some to bring back riches for the king, others vegetables for the queen, I guess.
Well, and a lot just for knowledge,
Well, and then there was also a little interest in riches. I think 100,000 people tried to go to Alaska for the gold rush.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy. And the same with people going to California. Difficult trip, to say the least. They hope to get something out of it, so they're willing to make the investment in energy and time and so forth. Not many of them found anything, just enough to make California the Golden State.
Yeah, but the motivation was there. All right, if you're just tuning in now, this is Alan B. Smith of Paranormal Now, and my guest is Stanton Friedman. If you want to listen, you can always go to IRN's website, InceptionRadioNetwork.com, and listen live there, or download the app on your smartphone. And if you want to find out more information about Stanton, you can go to StantonFriedman.com. And of course, if you want to follow me, you can go to Paranormal Now Radio on Facebook, or where I usually hang out, at Paranormal Now on Instagram. Stanton, there's so many younger scientists now that I get the sense that they are more imaginative of the possibilities of what they can do with physics and space travel. Do you feel like that's true?
I'm not sure. I think they're interested in science fiction, and they have much less trouble. I mean, I get nobody telling me that we must be the only ones.
But I don't know. I get the sense that there are younger scientists. I mean, even if you look at Michio Kaku, I mean, he speaks much more loosely about the possibility of visitation, and he's loud and proud about what he thinks, and it doesn't seem to affect him. Now, granted, I realize he's sort of on that, star caliber.
Yes, he does. And I've done his radio show a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
We met. We both testified about UFOs on a stage in Saudi Arabia. And I like this show. And something he wrote, and I talk about this in one of my books, he said the nearest civilization is likely to be 1,000 light years away, and who would care about us? Why would they, it's like a bunch of ants. Why would they would care about them? And I say they're probably within 50 light years, not 1,000. I have no idea why it is so common for astronomers to think. Well, Carl Sagan said in a paper he wrote umpteen years ago that the nearest star is probably 200 light years away that has a civilization. No basis at all for this kind of number.
Well, so then that in itself is speculation then.
The wildest speculation, yes. Nothing to base it on. That's why I mentioned the numbers on the planets. That's real. So if it'd be a big difference if they came up with the fact that, well, maybe only 1 in 1,000 stars is a planet. Yeah, they're not very close, are they? No matter how many stars there are, most of them don't have anything worthwhile. But if you say every star has at least 1, sometimes 9, that changes it.
Well, do you think the Webb's telescope, do you think that's going to actually help us confirm whether there's biological life on another planet?
I don't know if it's directly measurable. It may be inferable. That might help. But it ain't easy to zero in on a planet out there. I mean, you can tell that it's there because it goes past the star and you see the light being cut off and stuff. Now, I'm really enamored of the Kepler, gutsy. I mean, you're going to see a butterfly in front of a car headlight from a mile away.
That's impressive. Yeah.
It is. And so, I'm not saying this is all bad stuff. I'm saying it's exciting stuff. But let's look at it with an open mind. And
right. Well, I guess I wonder if we can confirm that there's biology somewhere else, maybe people will be a little bit more open to the idea that people are visiting here.
Well, I don't say that they're not. If they're in a situation like they attend my lecture, they already stuck their neck way out. And I've seen people, hey, Joe, I didn't know you were interested in this subject. Well, I didn't know you were. They've known each other for 20 years. But we don't talk about flying saucers, after all. So I don't get a hard time. And it helps. I've had a woman dinner talk and stuff, and she says to her husband afterwards, how come you raised your hand when he asked who had had a sighting? Well, I did. We never told me about it. Oh, we were just married. I was afraid you'd laugh at me. I mean, it's a constant problem. So that's one of the things I try to do, is to get people to recognize it's okay. You got a lot of people out there. That's why they're always shocked at those results at the end of my lecture.
Yeah, Stanton, if you had one person's ear that you can talk to, that would have influence, who would that be?
That would have influence, you mean?
On breaking open the truth.
I don't really know, because I don't know who's running the show. I will say this. I briefly met President Carter.
Oh, really?
He was at an airport waiting. Well, this is after he was president. I saw the Secret Service man. We were both waiting for airplanes. And I went over, making sure my hands were out in the open, and complimented about some stuff that he'd done, and then mentioned problems with cover-up and CIA directors and stuff. And he said that, it's a problem you have. Presidents can't always trust what their CIA directors tell them. That's why I appointed, and I forget the guy's name, we were Annapolis classmates, and I trusted him. But you don't always get the truth. I think Bush told Carter that he didn't have a need to know when Bush was head of CIA, So I consider him a fundamentally decent man, President Carter. And he's done an awful lot of good for the world.
Right.
If Lawrence, a Rockefeller would be nice, but I don't know how much influence they have.
Right. Well, if you could get access, if someone said to you, Stan, I can show you the spacecraft, I can show you an alien body, but you can't tell anybody, would you take them up on that, and would you not tell anybody?
Well, look, I worked under security for 14 years. If I give my agreement to keep things classified, I keep it. It's just built into the system kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that tells a lot right there.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is, look, I'm 82 years old. They might figure, hell, he doesn't have that many years to live, so what would it hurt? But security doesn't work that way. It's not curiosity trips for people. It's much more important than that.
Yeah. Do you have any last statements for the record before you go?
It's good to be an earthling, and I wish more of us would think of ourselves that way instead of all these nationalistic labels that lead to wars.
And not take that for granted. All right. Thank you so much, Stanton. All right. That's it for Paranormal Now, Episode 1. Thank you for tuning in, and I want to thank Joe Champion, Bob Tarmac, and MJ Lucas at the Inception Radio Network. And I would like to hear from you guys. You can find me on Facebook at Paranormal Now Radio, or go to Instagram and find me at Paranormal Now there, and let me know what you think. And you can email me directly if you like at paranormalnow@aol.com. So until our next ghostly and monstrous meeting, let the mystery take you.